European diet and lifestyle. This is a short article, came to me from Dr. Peter Attia, and you can find him at peterattiamd.com. He is a longevity and health span specialist, medically trained, and has moved over to more, if you will, natural methods of longevity and health span. He called this article European Vacation. You'll see why in a moment. I'm calling it European Nutrition and Lifestyle. I know I'm not alone in sensing this. I've had this discussion with at least a dozen friends over the past few years. There's something fundamentally different about food in Europe when compared to food in the US. Yes, there are obvious differences. In Europe, the portions seem to be smaller. They seem to contain less sugar, and meals tend to take longer. Although you tend to be on vacation in Europe, Dr. Attia said, but even on vacation in North America, meals tend to be just quicker. It seems to be that way. Europe also tends to lend itself to more walking and coffee and myriad other things that will make about what he's about to say less than scientific. But boy, I think it's going to make a lot of sense, and I think a lot of us will agree. I'm becoming convinced that there's something different about the starches, especially the breads and pastas, there in Europe versus here in the United States. I don't have yet enough information to suggest to know what I'm talking about. Actually, he's a really smart guy. He knows exactly what he's talking about. So this pure hypothesis generation. Is there different strains of wheat? More on that in a moment. Are there different pesticides? Absolutely. Is there different ingredients used alongside the wheat? I don't know. So let's shed a little light on there, and I think Dr. Attia knows a lot of this. U.S. wheat has more gluten than European wheat for the most part, maybe 15% to 10%. So if you're gluten sensitive, you're going to be more sensitive here than in Europe. Plus, the wheat here is soaked in glyphosate or Roundup more so than in Europe. Now, as far as I understand now, in Europe, glyphosate and Roundup isn't completely banned, but it's been severely restricted in many countries, in many cities, in many municipalities. There's more lactic acid in a lot of European bread recipes. The lactic acid will break down the gluten more so. And the European bread is made more with just plain old yeast. It takes longer to rise, and that's why bread over there is fresh, and then you won't see a lot of day-old bread in Europe, right? But you'll see a lot of bread here on the stores with a lot of preservatives and a lot of ingredients besides flour, water, yeast, and salt, right? You don't see a lot of bread like that in the United States. So there's a lot of differences with these starches, particularly with the bread. But here's what I observed in my recent trip to Italy, says Dr. Attia. I went out of my way to never say no to food, which meant eating more pasta and bread in 1 week than I have in the past year combined. I also ate as much gelato as possible on 4 occasions, and each time came away feeling fine. Not sick and not longing to drink 2 gallons of water after this. Both feelings I experience at home, even if I have 10% of that volume with ice cream, even high-end ice cream. So he said no, he didn't say no to everything. He kind of ate everything, but kind of felt fine, is his point. So to recap, bread, pasta, and gelato seem somehow different in Europe. And I've experienced this now in 4 or 5 European countries that I've traveled to, Dr. Attia. What gives? I don't think it's just that the pasta is cooked al dente. There's something going to be different here. It's not to suggest a reasonably carbohydrate intolerant person like himself can consume all he wants without consequence, but I do sense that I can consume more in Europe than he can back home. This is interesting. A few weeks ago, my friend Mark Hyman, Dr. Mark Hyman, with all of his books and so forth, interviewed me for his podcast. I'll be looking forward to that. And after recording, we hit up his favorite local spot for dinner. The discussion that Dr. Hyman and Dr. Attia had was centered around this interesting finding that so many people have had, and I've seen this with so many of my patients. Not the super celiac person that can't have any gluten at all, but it's the gluten-sensitive person here in the United States that travels to Europe. They eat the bread, pasta, pizza, and so forth over there, and they feel fine, and they come back to the United States feeling poorly. I think a lot of that is due to the different wheat and gluten, the different ingredients, and soaking the stuff here in that poison glyphosate and Roundup. I'm Dr. Scott Fuller.